what is culture? The way you do things, it's really the way you behave. Because I reckon a coach is a bit like being a psychopath, right? You're watching the room, you're trying to pick up what's going on, you're trying to pick up patterns. I really need to change. Really? And it's probably, I don't think I've coached badly, but I don't think I've coached well there. I didn't know Graham Henry that well, but a little I had to do with him. Like, he was a good student of life, I reckon. Probably the best experience I had for coaching was doing casual teaching.
Welcome to Coaching Culture, the podcast about cultivating culture and leadership. I'm Ben Herring and I've been loving this side of the game for bloody ages. On this episode, we welcome Eddie Jones. Renowned for his shaping high-performing cultures in his own distinct way and frequently in the media spotlight, he has experienced it all. He loves the game, prizes the art of coaching and always invites deeper questions. Eddie, what is your definition of culture and how does it look for you?
I think it's the way you do things. I've heard it being described as a behaviour when you're not with people, but I think it's just the way you do things. Like, I can remember playing at Leicester and threw a quick line out in, and I got a big hand on the back of the shoulder from the tight head prop. He said, "We don't do it like this. We don't do it like that here." And immediately, you knew the players they believed in something because they had a way of playing. And my experience at Leicester during that time was exactly that. The players were really powerful and led the culture of the team. You have little experiences that just enlighten you to the culture. Then I remember going to the Springboks, and the first thing I had to do, Jake White asked me to give a appraisal of the Springboks, which was pretty daunting, Australian coach walking in, giving appraisal of the Spring. Anyway, we chatted, and then I remember at the end of the meeting, Victor Matfield and Free Dupree came up and said, "Do you remember that player used to play at the Brumbies? It was like a winger off." He said, "They're the sort of things we want to start looking at." You had an impression at the Springboks that it was a really tough, hard-driven, coach-driven team where, in fact, the players were really, really strong within our outside culture. So I think just get a feel of the way things are done, and what's important in the place. And sometimes it can be rugby and sometimes it can be other values that are really important. Like, it's interesting with Japan, going back to Japan now, a big thing's been made about Japan, about how they leave places, how they left the dressing room. And to me, that's the only thing left from what we had before. And probably the good things are gone, but the ceremonial part of keeping things clean, the players still want to keep, but they don't want to. Well, not that they don't want to keep the other things; those things have been forgotten. Like, maybe respect and loyalty and some of those more intrinsic values that, again, depending on the team, they either stand out or they don't.
Yeah, and when just on reference to sort of going into the Springboks as an Aussie, did you have a bit of intent about how you started that? Did you just roll on yourself?
No, I always, essentially try to be myself. But I always remember after that, about 3 sessions afterwards, one of the players came up and he said, "Please don't swear at training, coach. We don't like swearing." And again, that was a really strong message, and as a coach, when you get those messages from the players, there's something cooking here, there's something happening here, because they're guiding the behaviour. Because what is culture? The way you do things, it's really the way you behave. So your actions are more important than your thoughts, because your actions are always that's what you do.
And how did you adjust on that one? Like what's the balance between? Appreciate that's what, like, say, the swear, and if you thought, nah, this needs to get the message across, would you?
No, you could feel that was almost like a non-negotiable, because the other thing about culture, I think, when you go, and I'm talking about different cultures now, when you go to a culture, I think you've got to be able to pick up what's non-negotiable, and then not try to challenge those ones. But then there are other areas that definitely will be negotiable, and they're the things you can possibly improve the culture of the organisation at that time.
Yeah. What were some of those examples like you did such a good job England when you got a meal? Or is there any ones from that you went in and it was just if it changed?
Well, every team's really different, mate, and that's the thing that probably has been consistent. You just got to try to find the one or two things that are going to improve how you're doing things. Like they had a really good team, England, good players, but they were trying to be something they weren't, which was an all-action team. Like England's not an all-action team; they're a containment team. They contain teams, and then when they get a chance, they'll break. And it's almost, I always see the English sport is nearly all the sports are like that. That's when they're at their best, and they can be something else for a while. And I think that gets back to a bit of a societal, the way the society is, because coaching international teams, I always find that you've got to sort of understand the society and what are the key values in the society, and that will be generally the same in the team. English like to be polite. Again, they don't like confrontation in front of people, so really tried to avoid that. But they like humour. So you could use humour with England because, sarcasm's a big part of their culture. Japanese, polite, punctual, like punctuality is huge in Japan. Yeah.
Did you have to gain a sense of humour going to England? Did you have to work on it into your?
No, well,
you're a funny guy, but did you have to consciously go to be more polite and slightly more humorous when I'm speaking in front of the team, or was it just sort of?
I just targeted a couple of guys to have a bit of fun with. To start with, I thought, like I knew Haskell beforehand, so I'd had lunch with him and met him a few times, so I sort of knew him. But I went to him before the meeting, before one of our first meetings. I said, mate, you're going to be my number one player. You're going to play every game of the Six Nations, so I'm going to back you, right?
Yes.
And just like that. And then at the meeting, I made a comment about him, like I hope he's doing his finger exercise because he's hanging on like dear life to be in the team. So it sort of broke the meeting up.
Yeah, right. How did he respond to it?
He was good. He was good as gold. He was good as gold.
Yeah. Well, I guess that was the one because I had that experience coming from Leicester to Japan.
Yeah.
I tried to just cut and paste what we were doing there until the captain, Lioto, came up and said, just because it works there doesn't mean it's going to work here. And he was right. Like the whole system that I was trying to do just wouldn't work. Would you agree that you've got to individualise to what's there?
You've got to know what the room needs, what that team needs. Yeah. And again, I think, some of the base cultural values of the society or guides the way you do it, but you've got to find out what they need and what they need quickly.
Do you think that's, so if you were to expand this to sort of outside of rugby to sport or business, would you say that's kind of the fundamental of a culture is understanding the deeper roots?
Yeah.
What, like if it's a national business, it might be what is that nation's drivers to this?
100%. And know what people think. Like, there's that great story about Gone, I can't remember how you pronounce it, took over Nissan, who were bankrupt, going bankrupt. He came in, he spent the first 4 or 5 days just walking the floor, talking to people. What do you think? And it's the same in a rugby team. You go into a rugby team and you try to pick out 3 or 4 players that you think might give you some good information. Try to pick out 3 or 4 players that you can see that they're not quite sure whether they're gonna give you everything they got. And then you try to pick up a thread of that and take it through. And I think the interesting thing is that, like, going back to Japan 10 years and going back to Australia after 20 years, some of the things that were relevant 10 or 20 years ago aren't relevant now. Society's changing all the time, but I think it's really changing some of the behaviours of players now, particularly in Japan where they were really team focused. And you think about Japan after World War II, they were a devastated country, had to work together. Like, it was a big thing about working together. They created a religion to bring the country together. Like Shinto's like a religion in each temple has a different god, and they tried to make an all Japan Shinto so everyone would buy in. But now it's definitely changing. It's much more individual. And so how I coached 10 years ago at Japan's not relevant now. I really need to change.
Really?
And it's probably, I don't think I've coached badly, but I don't think I've coached well there in the first year, that I didn't pick that up quick enough. And some of the times, you say you don't pick it up quick enough, but you've got to let it evolve a little bit and find out a bit, because you only really know under pressure how that culture is going to be. Because that's the other thing, I reckon. You don't really know what a culture is until they're under pressure. It's the old tea bag test. Someone holds up a tea bag, unless you put it in hot water, you don't know how it tastes. It's the same. Everyone can have, we're all in this together. We want to work together. We all respect it. But it's when you're under pressure, you really find out.
And do you find there's a bit of experimenting? Is it kind of
100%. And it depends on your situation. With Japan now, it's a longer growth spurt. Like we're probably going to take 3 or 4 years to get to where we need to get. So I don't need to do things urgently. But if I did that with England, you wouldn't be in the job.
Yeah.
Right. So you've got to realise the situation.
That's the pressure, isn't it?
Yeah.
Results versus long-term process.
Yeah.
Well, I actually enjoyed you saying walking the floor, Eddie, because I heard you say that years ago, and I actually took that on board as my own personal thing. I think you were talking about you just walk the gym floor sometimes and just chat and be there for a session. And I personally found the information you get around who's the clown, who's the different aspects was unbelievable.
And how the players are relating to each other.
Yeah.
Without any prompting. Who do they go to for a bit of support or a bit of leadership? Who's the guys that they really respect? I think you can pick that up a lot by just watching people.
And is it a gut feel, you reckon, or is there any triggers that you go? If we take the example, you're walking the gym floor in a professional environment, is there anything you would go, that's a good sign, or is there anything you would go, that's a bad sign?
I always look at the groupings. If they choose their own groupings, who gravitates to who, and if you've got the senior players all gravitate to each other, that immediately sends out a bit of a warning.
And what would you do if you saw that?
Well, I'd encourage the S&C coach to look at it. I've changed, slowly changing. Like I would have done that myself, and now I want the staff to do it.
What's that?
The way teams are now, there's so much more to do that you need to delegate responsibility more. That as a head coach, you can't be responsible for everything. So you need your coaches to be doing that job for you, because there's too much to see now, mate. Yeah. And the squads are bigger now. Like, even at international level, we got 36, 38 players all the time. And previously you had 28 to 30. Like that extra 8 to 10 is a lot more people to look after. So you need more people being responsible for observing the players, picking up threads, getting better behaviour from them.
Do you think with the culture that even though you're delegating, that essentially the culture is on the leader or the head coach or the director? Is that you?
I think he's got to set the direction. But I don't think he always has to be the one pushing it. And in fact, you don't want that to be the case. You want that to be diversified and right. And broken up more. Because again, I think the more you can get, the more voices saying the same thing, the more chance you've got of getting a tipping point. And when you've got a tipping point, that is, you've got enough people doing the right thing, then you get real change.
Mm. Is there a degree of selling the culture?
Definitely, but sometimes I think the only culture you got is the game. Like that's the thing that drives people together. And other times it can be wider values. Like, again, if I look back at that 2015 team with Japan, we were about saving Japanese rugby. So it was a much wider purpose than just playing rugby. Whereas now I think the only thing that really brings those players together, I don't think they have huge nationalistic pride. Yeah, that's a change. And again, that's not a criticism, it's just a reality. And so the game's the driving force that brings them together.
So just in that regard, you were talking about that be the fastest team in the world. Is that the
That's what we're trying to sell. But that's a hard sell too, mate.
It is.
Yeah, because it's hard. It's hard. Like, would you rather be sitting on the beach or repeatedly sprinting, And most people want to sit on the beach, mate. Look how many people are out there now.
I chatted to a few blokes around that camp that you did at 215, and a couple of the guys are like retired now. They're like, that's a oncer. That's how you guys trained, but memorable. Like when they look back with almost pride about how they went about it.
Well, I reckon that's another interesting piece of culture, is that how you get that emotional attachment, like how you get them to really remember, because all the conversations you remember are things that touch you emotionally. And so one of the jobs of the leaders is to make sure that he's got the right amount of emotion when he presents a message, and that's supported by the rest of the staff as well.
Do you think on that aspect? So this was kind of where I guess I'm getting at with this conversation, that the right amount of emotion in a conversation or a presentation is not really the rugby element, is it? It's like the ability to deliver. Would you suggest that area of that delivery would be a real focus for leaders or key coaches to practice and go away and work on that delivery?
Definitely, mate. Definitely.
Have you done that yourself?
Well, I think it's, a lot of that's about what's the context of the situation. Like a guy was talking to me yesterday about a very experienced coach called Frank Dick, who coached Daley Thompson, Katrina Viss, Boris Becker. So he was athletics coach, but he coached a lot of people. And he's got this wonderful ability to understand where you are and then deliver the right message at that time. And I think that's a real skill. Because I can give you a message now that's relevant at this moment, but if your mood changes, then that message is not necessarily going to be right.
Yeah.
And I need to be able to sense that with you and then change the message.
And has that just been experience?
I think
being reflective on, like, how do you grow that aspect of yourself?
I think you've got to be purposeful about it. Firstly, you've got to understand that's important. We had the last week of the tour, one of the staff got up and said, it's just another week. Well, it's not another week. It's the last week of the tour. Yeah, so everyone's thinking differently now. Last week of the tour, some people are thinking, I want to go down Coogee Beach. I want to get home and see my girlfriend. Yeah. They're not thinking that in the first week of the so you've got to understand the context to get and then try to connect with those players. So I think you've got to be purposeful about it. I think you've got to think a lot about the game and about the situation, and that's the hardest thing to do, mate. Particularly when you're under pressure week to week, is to find the space to think.
Yeah. What do you do to find that space?
Well, in previous teams before Japan, this one I've always had, like, I'd call a second set of eyes. I had a guy called Neil Craig who was absolutely fantastic. Like, we'd sit down every morning, have coffee. And just spoke about the day, what happened yesterday, what's important today, who's going to be important today, who needs to be spoken to, what sort of message you want to deliver. And I reckon that's almost like gold, mate. When you got someone there that's independent, not too caught up in the emotion of the team, but knows enough to give good advice. And you see that a lot in NBA now. Like a lot of the basketball coaches have got a senior guy who sits above him for that same sort of thing. And I think because the roles have become so big, mate.
So it's almost like a mentor in whatever space you're.
A coach mentor, mate.
Coach mentor.
100%.
Massively important.
Yeah, and people say, why does a head coach do that? That's what we pay him for.
Yeah.
But, it's to support the person to do the job as well as they can.
And did you find just having that person just took you out of whatever swirl you're in or the pressure or anything like that?
Just help you get better focus about what was important. Like, same thing on the field. What are the players, the players have got that much going on. What's next? What's important? It's the same for the coach. What's next? What's important?
Yeah,
and you just got to be thinking that. And when you got all these other things like the general manager's told you something or whatever, you lost a play, you find out some player hasn't done the right thing. You've got all that going in the background. That can trigger an emotional response.
Yeah.
That's probably not the right response for the team. But you might feel it's right for you, but it's not right for the team.
Mm. Well, just in light of that, like one question I'd be really keen to ask you is around that is, obviously you take a fair bit of heat in the media and things like that, probably more so than probably anybody else in this field. And I'm really intrigued to know how you absorb it or don't absorb it. Like just knowing you a little bit, you seem like you have a water off a duck's back, it seems like. But I guess the question is, how do you process people coming at you like that? And because I know when I get that sort of pressure, sometimes it comes overwhelming. I have to actually step out. But you seem really good at being able to deal with it well, and move on, and seemingly to move on. But I just want to know, does it sink a bit, or you just got so used to it, or how's it work?
There's a couple of things I always remember when I was young, and my mother's Japanese, and my father went and fought in the Vietnam War. So the RSL is supposed to come and cut your grass and help because you.
Oh yes.
And I remember they were supposed to come and cut our grass because we had quite a hilly place. And the RSL came and they took one look at my mother and said, "We're not cutting your grass." And I always remember my mother saying, "Oh, we'll just have to do it there." No recrimination, don't hold a grudge, just get on with it. And she had a pretty tough life. So I think I've got a bit of that about me, but I've also, I can lose it at times. Like I was disappointed I lost it in Australia a bit. I allowed that to get to me too much. I was a bit disappointed with that, but generally speaking, I just try to ignore it, mate. And I don't read any sort of media. I've got no idea. I don't read any, and it's probably hurt me a little bit that I don't keep in touch with rugby media, but I've just decided if I start reading it, it'll just put me in a space where it's not productive.
Yeah.
And I really don't care, to be honest. Like, all you can do as a coach is just do as well as you can. There's always going to be people who say, "Oh, that's not good enough," or "He's done this," or "He's done that." But all you can do is just keep doing it. And if you keep coaching, you're obviously doing something okay.
Yeah,
right?
exactly right.
So that's all I worry about now.
Yeah. It's fascinating, isn't it? Because like just that how much, like I know, like I certainly feel in my thing, but like when you have a couple of losses and people come at you and you start doubting, am I actually doing the right thing? But like you certainly.
I doubt all the time, mate. Like I can tell you, no, but I think you have to, mate. I think, and the one thing I've learned about having met a number of successful people is they all doubt, mate. They all doubt. And I reckon it's almost like what you need. You need to have those doubts to make you more focused, because that keeps you thinking, right, am I thinking the right thing? But then you've got to decide to have a course of action. But I reckon you've got to be doubting all the time. I remember, Nigel Ray at Saracens, one of the richest guys in England. I remember he said to me, every day I wake up, I think I'm bankrupt. So how am I going to make money today? What am I going to do? And I reckon rugby's the same. I wake up this morning, I'm thinking, shit, I could have done that better. Like seriously, I woke up about 4:30, sweating, thinking about something in the week against England. I wish I would have done that better. Yeah. But then I get up and I say, right, okay, done that. Yeah, let's have a think about that. What can we do? And then come up with an action plan.
So that's basically, do you think that's improved over time for you? Just with time in?
Well, not holding on to it, not letting it affect my behaviour. I reckon definitely, mate, definitely. And I reckon age does that to you.
Yeah.
I reckon that's one of the benefits of age. There's not too many others, but that's one of the benefits.
Yeah, tolerance of red wine and ability to talk better. So when you set out a plan, I sort of had this around some of your leadership too. I think back to when the way you stuck to your game plans, I really enjoyed. I remember when you coached Suntory back then, and you had, just from other team watching, you had like the sort of policy we ran everything, no kicks at goal, 4-man liners, that was it, that's how we roll. And I always used to think like other coaches go, look, they're just doing that, we know what we're going to do. And but you're stuck to it. Did you sort of have that policy and just go? Well,
I reckon that's the best part of coaching, when you really believe in a way you want to play, and you really you think you got the players to do it, and then you stick at it, because everyone thinks they can get you. right?
Yeah.
And I reckon that's the real joy. That's probably what I enjoy the most. Like with Japan now, like everyone's saying you can't play like that. Well, you probably can't, but let's see if we can.
Yeah.
Like imagine going to the World Cup and playing like running the ball from everywhere, and you knock off a couple of teams. Like then you create this great opportunity for other people to do it. And I reckon you got to believe in something. You got to believe in a way to play, and stick at that. And that doesn't mean it doesn't evolve over time. Like I remember with Suntory, like the first year with Suntory, we ran everything right. We won the Japan Cup, got beaten in the final. Next year we signed Free Dupree. So we bought a kicking game, right? So then we had all action running team plus the best kicking night. And then
you didn't even take shots to go on final.
We became unbeatable then. And that's how personnel. You look at South Africa, right? South Africa, Russie takes over. They kick the ball 50 times. They win the World Cup in 2009 by belligerence, just by being belligerent, tougher, harder. But now they got change of personnel. They got some exciting back three players. They can counter-attack as good as anyone in the world. So now they've got still got the same game, but now they've added on this extra layer to their game through different personnel coming in. And now you've got like such a fantastic game.
That's right. How do you deal with that, like sticking to something that's not working though? Say you didn't get to the finals and make it, and then people sort of folded arms going, we'll see if this works, and it doesn't work. Is that's the pressure you're talking about, the teabag test? That tests how much you believe personally.
Yeah. Well, you've got to weigh things up, and sometimes the environment changes, so you've got to make allowances to the environment. I remember coaching in that period around middle 2000s when it was like 90 kicks a game. I didn't enjoy coaching then.
Oh, really?
No, because I was brought up at Randwick, right? You can see where, you're looking out on Coogee Beach. We wanted to attack. We wanted to be the most all-action team in the world. And that's how I want to play rugby. Like, that's to me the game, and that's the beauty of the game. Like, of course you can win through kicking. We did a bit with England, I'd be a hypocrite if I didn't acknowledge that. But that's not the way I think the game should be played. And you want to play the game how you want to play. It's like, in cricket. Australia turned around one day cricket when they decided to target 300 runs. And everyone said, well, we can't do it. Then they get 300 and 300 becomes the norm. Now 400's nearly the norm, right? Mm. So no one knows where the limit is. And sometimes you've got to fail for that limit to be broken. And I reckon that's one of the best things about coaching and best thing about human endeavour, trying to do what's impossible.
Or perceived.
Yeah, perceived to be impossible.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Now, Eddie, when we're talking about you, I'd like to ask this question of sort of your leadership. A lot of people are scared of you. Do you think there's an element of that in leadership, which is actually a must-have to a degree? Certainly as a father myself, I know that there's huge benefit is when Chad's voice comes on and the kids sit up and listen properly because there's that little bit of fear around that. Do you think in leading teams of not just sport, but anything, there needs to be an element of fear?
I don't know whether fear is the right word. I think respect is probably a better word. I think you need to have respect. And I think sometimes when you're seen as a really tough, disciplined person, that can come across as fear.
Yeah.
But there's not too many people that operate well with fear. And certainly I've never tried purposely to act as though I've got fear.
Do you think it's just because your standards, you have high standards around expectations? Do you think that's the bit which is?
Well, I think that's the one thing you got to stick at, mate. Like, I think one of the problems in coaching at the moment, there's a lot of coaching that's done without correction. Big thing about coaching, and the best phrase, I'm going to pinch this from basketball guy John Wooden. He says the best coaching is coaching without resentment, right? So if I can correct you and you don't resent it, then we've got a massively positive relationship. Sometimes you can coach and correct and the player resents it for whatever reason. You haven't been able to phrase it right or wasn't the right timing. There can be a number of reasons for that. And you're always aiming to coach without resentment. So you're correcting the play, making the player get better, making the team get better. But sometimes you get a bit of resentment and you don't want that, but it happens because we're not perfect.
And would you say that's the art? Is that you said there's a lot of different things why that resentment? Could it be like, they're pissed off about something else, or and that's the art of understanding that individual.
Yeah. Well, I remember I had an England player. Every time I corrected him, I could see his eyes rolling. He didn't want to know. Thought, bugger this. There's a better way. And he was an academic guy. So what I did was that when I saw something in his game, I'd give him the stats. I'd give him the videos. I said, go away and look at it and then come back to me with what you think. And then he'd come back with the answers.
Mm-hmm.
I said, he's a bright guy, so he could see it. It's the best doing this, you're doing this, so-and-so's doing this, you're doing this. Well, there's a gap there. So how are we going to fill that gap? You come back and tell me. So I reckon over time you develop more ways to do it, whereas before, when you first started, or when I first started coaching, certainly when I coached, if you weren't doing something right, someone would come and tell you straight away.
Yeah.
I can always remember at training once with Bob Dwyer, like lying on the ground, and I remember him saying, is there any chance you can get, with a few more expletives, any chance you can get off the ground quicker? And that's 30 years ago. I can still remember that, right? And that stood with me the whole time. Every time I went to the ground, I could hear him ringing in the head. But now you do that with a player, it's not necessarily going to have the same effect. Yeah, because then kids aren't educated like that now.
With the different societies.
Yeah, 100%. So therefore, you got to find different ways of solving that problem and correcting that problem for the player.
And that's the art of
and that's where I reckon now, and you're working at school now. Your way to connect to the players and get them to feel like they belong to something is so important. If you look at everything we do in life now, this is the one consistent thing they got. Humans want to belong to something. That's why we're the superior race. You don't see chimpanzees flying jets and, putting up skyscrapers or making nuclear bombs. Humans have been able to do it because they like to belong to something and work together. And at times now it seems like people don't want to do that, but they really do, and you've got to find a way to get them to do it. And that's the hard part now.
And that would be a creative part of your brain working rather than...
Yeah. Well, just even look at it. If you want people to work together, right, and you've got them sitting in a room and I'm sitting behind you and the only thing I'm looking at is the back of your head, right? Does that create a good relationship? But if I'm looking you in the eyes, I know exactly what you're thinking. I know exactly, I'm engaging you. So we're creating a potential belonging situation there.
And what do you reckon that if you had to put a weighting these days on value of the X's and O's, because that drills and skills versus this bigger picture stuff, this culture, this environmental stuff, do you have a sort of ballpark where you would go these days, and is that used?
I was just thinking about what you're saying there. I don't know, but I reckon it's almost like, can I just borrow your pen? That's your exercise. That might start the process of building your culture, right? Or you might do it the other way, that builds to it. But at some stage, this becomes the dominant thing.
The culture.
But it mightn't start like that. It might start with everyone getting on the same page because of the game. And then from that, you build your culture out. But for other teams, it might be, you've got to be purposeful about starting your culture before you even get into this area.
What would be the example of teams that are just not harmonious at all? Then you've got to hit that first and then work towards the skills.
Well, I think if their rugby identity is not clear, like I think you go down and play at Randwick, right? And you know you've got to run the ball, right? You go and play at the Chiefs, you got to I'm making an assumption here. You got to smash at the breakdown. Yes, otherwise you're not playing, right?
Yes.
Okay. So that team has an identity. Like you know what you got to be good at. So those teams are easier then to work on the culture because you've got that in place. Whereas some teams you don't know what they're good at, right? And the players don't even know what they're good at, so they can't even get on the same page here. So I reckon you've got to find some sort of identity there first before you can do the more complicated stuff. Because the culture is always more complicated than X and O's.
Yeah. Because the X and O's don't change.
No. Get up the field as quickly as you can.
Yeah.
Stop the other mob getting up the field as quickly. Yeah. But the way you do it, I reckon, and I'm not, that's always intrigued me why it happens. Like I know with England, as I said, we concentrated a lot on that before we even went there.
You concentrate
Yeah,
on skills.
before you. Yeah. Whereas with Japan, it was more about this
culture fit.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fascinating. Because what did you feel like the skills were with the Japanese? They had the skills enough.
Well, I feel there was a general buy-in to how we wanted to play. Yeah, that was the Japan way, but it's not now. It's not now. I'm going to have to this is the thing I'm thinking about now, what we're going to put our priority. Because the thing is you can't do everything. You've got to weight things. It's almost like, right, this is a priority now. Now this is a priority. But we can't afford for that to be lost. So you're continually bouncing back and forwards between the two areas.
Yeah. And I got asked this the other day when I did a presentation on the importance of culture, and you can't measure. But then I sort of equated it to like the galaxy where the stars are the skills and the drills, because you can measure that distance and you can see them shining. But the background is the culture and the environment. You can't measure it, but you know it's there, and the importance of that surrounds and makes the stars shine brighter. But then one of the people in the audience came up to me afterwards and goes, well, how do you measure if what you're putting in place cultural wise is actually working? Like, I need to know a measurement. And I found that difficult to answer, because the whole thing around the environment and culture is it's almost impossible. You gut feel it, but
two things, mate. Go into a team meeting and see how much chatter there is before you walk in.
Oh, why do you say that?
If there's communication going on in the room, there's good banter, then I reckon you got a chance of the culture being good there. And then you finish training, how many go off the field quickly? How many stay behind and work, and how they work together? Like I remember going to Penrith, right?
Yes.
And watching him train. They finish training and Nathan Cleary grabs all the halfbacks, starts kicking, starts practicing. Fisher Harrod grabs all the props, does ruck defence, ruck attack. And you could see, like, no one's telling him to do it. And they're just doing it. And you could see how strong the culture of that team is. And the culture of the team is how much the players own the team. It's not how much the coach drives the team, it's how the players own the team. Because your responsibility as a coach is I'm not sure empower is the right word, but it's to make yourself redundant. Like the best teams are always the teams that run themselves, and the coach is just pushing them in this direction or slightly in this direction because they can get off course quickly. You know, we know that. But as soon as they start driving the team and all you're doing is pushing them, agitating, supporting them, sometimes challenge them, then you're in the right direction. And you could see that at Penrith.
Yeah. So that still was, those are great little cues, aren't they? Just
they're good measurements.
Good measurements.
Yeah. And same in the team meeting, mate. Find your most inattentive player, and when he starts banging his knees and starts twirling his head, it's time to finish the meeting.
Yeah. Yes, understood. Oh, mate, that's awesome. Hey, lastly, I'd love to just get your thoughts. I really appreciate the time today. The other one around your leadership is, your definition of success, and whether, I think we all know publicly what success looks like. Do you have any markers on privately what you hold yourself to? Or do you separate that out?
Definitely when I was young, it was about winning, mate. Definitely.
So you would say failure if you're not winning.
Yeah. And now it's about subjectively, am I getting the most out of that team? And that's the only thing you can do. Firstly, am I getting the most out of that team? And then secondly, trying to appraise how good a job you're doing. Was there something I missed today? Was there an opportunity I missed coaching-wise? And I try to do that at the end of every day, sit down and think, right, did I miss a coaching opportunity? Because I reckon a coach is a bit like being a psychopath, right? You're watching the room, you're trying to pick up what's going on, you're trying to pick up patterns, you're trying to look for relationships, and you've got to be so observant in what you do. Like Alex, we were lucky enough to meet Alex Ferguson a few times, and he was saying, like, he had his office outside the car park, right?
Yes.
So if you saw a player come out and he's on his phone, he's still on his phone, he immediately, right, you think there's something going on there, right? He's either had a fight with his wife or something's wrong with his girlfriend, and so he'd go down and he might go down and have a chat to him straight away. You all right, mate?
Mm.
Yeah, and that was one thing I really picked up strongly from him, how important observation is, and it's true.
Observations, like you said right at the start, where it's when people don't be watching.
Yeah. How they eat, who eats together, what they're eating, all those sort of things give you good indications.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of a cool analogy around the psychopath.
Yeah.
Is there a downside to that? You turn into the psychopath later down the road?
No, I don't think so. I hope not, mate.
Awesome. Like, what I didn't want this to be is like a chat with you about rugby stuff, because I think everyone knows you're sort of rugby, but like just the experiential stuff around some of these things. For me, where I'm keen to sort of refine this is to take it into like, these are gold nuggets, like coaching without correction and coaching without resentment. Like that's chapter in a book somewhere, isn't it? Like and then it's like, how do you not, like there's a goal. And I'm really, because I'm now going into an educational thing, I'm thinking this stuff is not like taught, the courses that I find them a waste of time because they're just teaching drills. And this is how you pass, which I don't understand, but this is good stuff.
Because I tell you, one of the probably the best experience I had for coaching was doing casual teaching. So when I first came out of uni, I casual teach for a year, right? And I went back to my old school, Matchfield High, which was rough as guts, mate, right? And by then, like when we grew up, I grew up with the Ellers, and we didn't even know they were black. They didn't know you were white. Like it just wasn't anything. And I went back to the school. The Aboriginal kids would sit in one corner, the white kids would sit in the other, and it was almost like this battle there. And as a casual teacher, you always had the bottom year 9 class, right? Because that's when the teacher's away, right? They don't want to coach those kids. So you got to try to find some way to work out, right, who's going to give me trouble? How am I going to keep them quiet? And who's going to help me? And I reckon, mate, for any coach, that's the best way. Because same with the team, mate. Like, who's going to help you? Yeah. Who's not going to help you? Right? Yeah.
Where's the extent? I've actually heard a number of top coaches have actually had educational experience.
I reckon I didn't know Graham Henry that well, but the little I had to do with him, like he was a good student of life, I reckon. Yeah, and I think he was probably from what I gather, early on a really strict disciplinarian. And then he learned, right, we've got to change here.
Eddie, we'll call it a day here because I appreciate you've got lots on. You're visiting Mum tomorrow, 99, coming up. So I think that's lovely, man. So really appreciate the time.
No, pleasure, mate. No, it was good fun, mate. I enjoy it. Good questions, mate.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, mate. Good man. Cheers.
Thanks, mate. It's been an absolute pleasure sitting down with Eddie Jones. Experience really is a great teacher, and I always get loads of value from conversations like these. I'd like to share now my key takeaways from this conversation with Eddie Jones. Number 1, coaching without resentment. What an ideal to aspire to. If you can offer tougher critiques and suggestions that players appreciate, you're doing something right. Most players actually love clear guidance on how to improve. The art is to do it in a way that builds them up rather than tear them down. Number 2, the teabag test. I loved this phrase, much like Mike Tyson's famous quote, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Sometimes you simply don't know how things will unfold. So my suggestion is to be prepared to stumble, reflect, adjust, and just keep moving. And try not to beat yourself up too much along the way. Number 3, walk the floors. Move around the gym or your office water cooler and just watch how people interact. You can work out such a lot of things by just being present. We'll see you next time.